The moment I saw my daughter-in-law beside my car, I realized some betrayals do not begin with a lie. They begin with a glimpse. My name is Margaret Collins. I am 71 years old, and I thought I understood the people I had spent my life loving. I was wrong. That Tuesday afternoon started like any other. I had driven to a grocery store a few miles from my neighborhood to pick up ingredients for Sunday dinner. My cart was full of things my family liked. Fresh vegetables, dinner rolls, apple pie filling. The kind of small purchases a mother keeps making long after her children become adults. The parking lot was crowded. Cars moved slowly between rows. Shopping carts rattled across the pavement. Nothing felt unusual. I remember checking my list one last time before walking toward my sedan. Then I saw them. At first, I only noticed the man. He was standing near the driver's side of my car. He looked familiar. A second later, I recognized him. Daniel Reed, the attorney who had handled several family matters over the past few years. I slowed my pace. Something felt strange. Then Vanessa stepped into view. My daughter-in-law was standing close to him. Too close. I stopped walking. The grocery bag suddenly felt heavier in my hands. For a brief moment, neither of them noticed me. They were focused entirely on each other. Their expressions were comfortable. Familiar. Not the expressions of two people sharing a casual conversation. They looked like two people sharing a secret. My heart pounded once. Then again. I moved behind a large pickup truck parked nearby. I did not want to be seen. I did not want them to know I was there. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the windows around them. Daniel smiled. Vanessa smiled back. Then they leaned toward each other. I stood perfectly still. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I simply watched. Years of life teach you that panic rarely reveals the truth. Silence often does. A few seconds later, they stepped apart and continued talking. Vanessa laughed softly at something he said. Daniel placed a hand on the roof of the car. Neither of them looked worried. Neither of them looked guilty. That was the part one could not forget. They looked comfortable. As if this had happened before. I quietly turned around and walked back toward the store entrance. I needed a moment to think. 10 minutes later, I returned using a different route through the parking lot. They were gone. My car sat alone beneath the afternoon sun. I loaded my groceries and climbed into the driver's seat. The steering wheel felt cold beneath my hands. I stared through the windshield for several seconds before starting the engine. Then a thought entered my mind and refused to leave. Daniel Reed was not just a family attorney. He was the man currently overseeing every important document connected to the Collins family estate. The drive home felt longer than usual. Traffic moved steadily through the afternoon, but my thoughts refused to settle. Every time I stopped at a red light, I saw the same image. Vanessa standing beside Daniel. The ease between them. The familiarity. The complete absence of surprise on either face. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had already decided on one thing. I was not going to confront anyone. Not yet. People reveal far more when they believe their secrets are safe. That evening, Andrew and Vanessa came over for dinner. It was a tradition we had maintained for years. At 6 o'clock sharp, I heard their car pull into the driveway. A few moments later, Vanessa stepped through my front door carrying a bottle of sparkling cider and wearing the same warm smile she always used around family. If I had not seen her earlier that day, I would have believed every bit of it. "Dinner smells wonderful," she said as she kissed my cheek. I smiled back. "Thank you for coming." Across the room, Andrew loosened his tie and dropped into his usual chair. He looked tired from work. Watching him laugh with his wife made something inside me ache. He trusted her completely. During dinner, I paid closer attention than I ever had before. Small things stood out immediately. Vanessa checked her phone several times. Whenever a message appeared, she angled the screen away from everyone else. Once, I noticed a brief smile cross her face before she locked the device and slipped it back into her purse. Later, Andrew mentioned Daniel's name while discussing estate planning updates. Vanessa nearly answered before Andrew finished speaking. It happened so naturally that nobody else noticed. I did. After dessert, Andrew went outside to take a work call. Vanessa offered to help me clean up. Together we carried plates into the kitchen. She stood beside me drying dishes while speaking casually about holiday plans. Her voice remained calm. Her movements relaxed. If she felt guilty about anything, she hid it exceptionally well. Then she said something that made me stop. Daniel believes it might be time to simplify some of the estate documents, she remarked. Too many old structures can create problems later. I placed the plate carefully into the cabinet. Is that so? I asked. That is what he recommends, she replied. The answer sounded rehearsed. A few minutes later they left. I locked the front door and walked upstairs. My late husband's office remained exactly as he left it. Inside a small wall safe were copies of family records, trust documents, and property agreements. I entered the code and opened the safe. At first, everything appeared normal. Then I noticed an empty space where a blue folder should have been. I searched again. Then a third time. The folder was gone. And that folder contained documents only a handful of people even knew existed. For several minutes, I stood in front of the open safe staring at the empty space where the blue folder should have been. The office was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock above my husband's desk. That folder had not contained cash or valuables. It contained something far more important. Records. Amendments. Property agreements. Notes my husband had written by hand before he passed away. Documents that explained exactly how certain family assets were supposed to be protected. Very few people knew those papers existed. Fewer still knew where they were stored. I closed the safe and sat down behind the desk. Panic would accomplish nothing. I needed facts. The next morning, I began reviewing every digital record I could access. Years ago, my husband insisted on creating electronic backups for important documents. At the time, I thought he was overly cautious. That morning, I silently thanked him. I spent hours comparing files. Some appeared unchanged. Others did not. Certain dates no longer matched. Several authorization records had been modified within the last 6 months. At first glance, the changes seemed minor. A signature update here. A beneficiary adjustment there. Nothing dramatic. But when viewed together, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Someone had been slowly rearranging pieces of a puzzle. Around noon, I called Daniel's office. I kept my voice calm and asked for copies of the latest estate summaries. His assistant promised to send them immediately. Less than an hour later, the documents arrived in my email inbox. I printed everything and spread the pages across the dining room table. The more I read, the more uneasy I became. Several revisions had been processed electronically. According to the records, I had approved them myself. Yet I had no memory of signing those authorizations. I examined each page carefully. The signatures looked authentic. Almost perfect. That frightened me more than a sloppy forgery would have. Whoever created them understood exactly what they were doing. By late afternoon, I had covered half the dining room table with paperwork. Outside, the sky darkened with approaching rain. Inside, I continued tracing changes line by line. Then I discovered something unexpected. One trust account connected to family property had been modified repeatedly over the previous year. Funds had been moved through several internal transfers before disappearing into an entity I did not recognize. The name meant nothing to me. It sounded like an ordinary consulting company. But one detail stood out. The account received regular deposits. Small enough to avoid attention. Large enough to matter. I copied the information into a notebook and continued digging. A few minutes later, another detail emerged. The same unfamiliar company appeared in records connected to legal expenses approved by Daniel's office. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was not. The rain finally began tapping against the windows. I looked across the table at the growing stack of documents. What I had seen in the parking lot suddenly felt much larger than a personal betrayal. Then my phone vibrated. A message had arrived from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. If you want to know where the money is going, stop looking at the signatures and start looking at the transfers. I stared at the message on my phone for a long time. The number was unfamiliar. There was no greeting. No explanation. Just a single sentence pointing me in a different direction. Earlier that week, I had been focused on signatures and missing documents. Now someone wanted me looking at money. I copied the message into my notebook and set the phone aside. Outside, rain continued tapping against the windows. Inside, the dining room table had disappeared beneath stacks of paperwork. I made a fresh pot of coffee and returned to work. The next morning, I began tracing every transfer connected to the unfamiliar consulting company. It was not easy. The records were scattered across multiple reports. Some transactions appeared under legal expenses. Others appeared under administrative fees. Individually, they looked ordinary. Together, they told a different story. By midday, I noticed something unusual. The transfers followed a pattern. Money moved from one account to another, then through a second company, before eventually reaching the consulting firm. It reminded me of someone trying to hide footprints in fresh snow. The trail was still there. It was simply harder to follow. I needed help. There was one person I trusted completely. Robert Walker. Robert had been my husband's closest friend for more than 40 years. After my husband passed away, Robert never disappeared from my life. He checked on me regularly. He told the truth even when it was uncomfortable. Most importantly, he understood business records better than anyone I knew. That afternoon, I drove to his house. Robert listened quietly while I explained everything. The parking lot. Daniel. Vanessa. The missing folder. The altered documents. The mysterious transfers. He never interrupted. When I finished, he folded his hands and looked at the records spread across his dining table. "You already know this is bigger than an affair," he said. I nodded. Robert spent nearly 2 hours reviewing the paperwork. Occasionally he circled a line with a pencil. Other times he wrote notes on a yellow legal pad. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, there is something here you need to see." He turned one document toward me. Several payments connected to the consulting company had originated from transactions authorized by Daniel's office. That alone was concerning. Then Robert pointed to a second column. My stomach tightened. A personal account connected to Vanessa appeared within the same network of transfers. For several seconds neither of us spoke. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Are you sure?" I asked. Robert nodded. "The names are hidden behind corporate registrations, but the ownership records connect them." I looked down at the page. Every answer seemed to create 2 new questions. If Vanessa and Daniel were connected financially, how long had it been happening? How much had they changed? And what else had they taken? As evening approached, Robert continued digging through public records. Then he found something neither of us expected. A pending transaction had been scheduled for the following month. It involved a piece of property that had belonged to my husband. Property that was never supposed to be sold. Robert slowly slid the document across the table. "Margaret," he said quietly, "someone is preparing to transfer ownership of the family land." I drove home from Robert's house just as the sun was disappearing behind the hills. The document he had shown me sat on the passenger seat beside me. I glanced at it every time I stopped at a traffic light. The family land? 42 acres my husband had purchased decades earlier. It was never our most valuable asset financially, but it was the property that meant the most to him. He taught Andrew how to fish there. He built picnic tables there with his own hands. Every summer our family gathered there for cookouts, birthdays, and reunions. The thought of losing it made my chest tighten. When I arrived home, I carried the document straight into my husband's office. I sat behind his desk and carefully reviewed every page again. The proposed transfer was scheduled for the following month. Several preliminary approvals had already been completed. According to the paperwork, everything appeared routine. But nothing about this felt routine anymore. The next morning, I called Andrew and asked him to stop by after work. He arrived around 6 o'clock looking concerned. We sat in the kitchen with coffee between us. For a few moments we talked about ordinary things. Then I placed the document on the table. "Have you seen this before?" I asked. Andrew studied it briefly and shook his head. "No." I explained what Robert had discovered. I expected surprise. Instead, I saw frustration. "Mom, you are reading too much into things," he said. "Daniel handles these matters professionally." The words stung more than I expected. Not because he disagreed with me. Because he trusted Daniel more than he trusted his own mother. I slid the document back toward myself. "And Vanessa?" I asked carefully. Andrew frowned. "What about Vanessa?" I chose my words with care. "Do you know everything she has been involved in?" His expression hardened immediately. "If this is about Vanessa, I do not want to hear it." The conversation ended soon afterward. As he left, I stood at the front door watching him drive away. For the first time, I realized how isolated I had become. Whoever was behind this had not only moved money and documents. They had slowly positioned themselves between me and my son. 2 days later, an unexpected message appeared on my phone. It was from Sophie, my 17-year-old granddaughter. We had always been close. She rarely texted during school hours, which immediately caught my attention. The message contained only 4 words. "Grandma, can you talk?" I called her during my lunch break. Her voice sounded nervous. She asked if we could meet in person after school. That evening, we sat together on a bench near a small community park. Sophie looked around carefully before opening her phone. Then she handed it to me. On the screen was a photograph. It appeared to be a screenshot of an email. I recognized Vanessa's name immediately. Beneath it was a message discussing timelines, approvals, and asset transfers. My pulse quickened. Then I read the final sentence. "We need everything completed before Margaret starts asking questions." For a moment, I could not speak. I sat on the park bench holding Sophie's phone while the late afternoon sun slipped behind the trees. The message on the screen was short, but it told me everything I needed to know. Someone had been planning ahead. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Sophie watched my face carefully. "Grandma, I did not mean to snoop," she said quietly. "I was using Mom's tablet to print a school assignment. The email notification appeared by accident." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You did the right thing by telling me." She looked relieved, but still worried. "Is Mom in trouble?" she asked. The question stayed with me long after we left the park. On the drive home, I realized this situation had become larger than missing paperwork or suspicious transfers. Vanessa was not simply reacting to opportunities. She was following a plan. The next morning, I called Robert and told him about the email. Within an hour, he was sitting across from me in my dining room reviewing the screenshot. He adjusted his glasses and studied every line. "The wording is important," he said. "They are discussing timing. That means decisions were already made before this message was sent." I nodded. That was exactly what worried me. Over the following week, Robert and I continued gathering information. Every new document seemed to confirm the same pattern. Property transfers. Administrative changes. Financial movements. Everything pointed toward a coordinated effort to move control away from the family structure my husband had carefully created. Then another discovery changed everything. While reviewing public business filings, Robert found evidence that Daniel Reed had received several consulting payments connected to entities involved in the transfer process. The amounts were significant. Not enough to attract public attention. More than enough to raise serious questions. I sat quietly as Robert explained the findings. Outside, leaves drifted across the backyard. Inside, my husband's old office felt smaller than ever. "Do you think Andrew knows?" I asked. Robert shook his head slowly. I do not. But if he does not know now, he is going to find out eventually. Later that evening, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Daniel. His voice sounded friendly, almost cheerful. He wanted to schedule a family meeting for the upcoming weekend. According to him, there were several estate matters that needed final approval. Final approval. The phrase immediately caught my attention. I agreed to attend. After the call ended, I wrote down every detail. 2 days later, another surprise arrived. Sophie came to my house carrying a small flash drive. She looked nervous again. I found this hidden inside Mom's desk drawer, she said. I do not know what is on it. We stared at the device sitting between us on the kitchen table. It was small. Ordinary. Easy to overlook. Yet, instinct told me it might contain answers we had been searching for. I carried it upstairs and connected it to my computer. Several folders appeared on the screen. Most contained financial records. Then I opened one marked private. The first file loaded instantly. As I began reading, my heart sank. Because for the first time, I was looking directly at conversations between Vanessa and Daniel themselves. For several minutes, I sat alone in my husband's office staring at the computer screen. The house was completely silent. The files inside the flash drive were organized by date. Whoever created them never expected anyone else to see them. I opened the earliest conversation first. At the beginning, the messages seemed ordinary. Discussions about appointments. Questions about paperwork. References to meetings. Then the tone changed. As the months passed, the conversations became more detailed. Vanessa and Daniel were discussing strategies. Timelines. Approvals. They spoke about family assets the way business partners discuss inventory. There was no emotion attached to any of it. That was what disturbed me most. The land. The trusts. The accounts. Everything was reduced to numbers and opportunities. I printed several pages and placed them into a folder. Then I continued reading. Shortly after midnight, I found the message that changed everything. It was sent nearly 8 months earlier. Daniel had written that Andrew remained unaware of the restructuring process, and that keeping him uninformed would prevent unnecessary complications. Vanessa responded only a few minutes later. Leave Andrew to me. I will handle him. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For a moment, I was no longer thinking about documents or property. I was thinking about my son. The little boy who once followed me through grocery stores. The young man who trusted people easily because he believed honesty was normal. Somewhere along the way, that trust had been used against him. The next morning, Robert arrived before breakfast. Together we reviewed every file on the drive. He remained silent for a long time. Finally, he removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Margaret, this is no longer suspicion, he said quietly. This is evidence. By afternoon, we had assembled a complete timeline. The missing documents. The financial transfers. The consulting payments. The emailed discussions. Every piece connected. Even the planned sale of the family land appeared repeatedly throughout the records. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why now? Why had they accelerated everything over the last few months? The answer arrived unexpectedly later that day. While reviewing a separate folder, Robert found a draft proposal prepared by Daniel's office. According to the document, several major approvals would become irreversible after the upcoming family meeting. Once signed, ownership structures would change permanently. I felt a chill despite the warm room. The meeting was not routine. It was the final step. That evening, Andrew called. His voice sounded tired. He mentioned that Vanessa seemed unusually stressed. According to him, she had spent days preparing documents for the weekend gathering. I listened quietly. The irony was painful. He was describing the very process designed to deceive him. Before ending the call, Andrew said something unexpected. Mom, I know things have felt tense lately, but after this meeting everything should finally settle down. After the call ended, I looked at the folder of evidence sitting on my desk. Nothing was going to settle down. Not anymore. The truth had already reached the point where it could no longer remain hidden. And for the first time since this began, I knew exactly what I was going to do when the entire family gathered together. The family meeting took place on a Saturday afternoon at my house. The same house where birthdays had been celebrated. The same house where my husband had spent his final Christmas. By noon, everyone had arrived. Andrew sat near the end of the dining table reviewing several documents Vanessa had placed in front of him. Daniel sat nearby with a professional smile and a leather briefcase resting beside his chair. Sophie remained unusually quiet. Robert sat across from me. Nobody seemed nervous except those who already knew the truth. Vanessa moved through the room with complete confidence. She poured coffee. She greeted relatives warmly. She acted exactly like someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. I watched silently. After years of raising a family, I had learned that people often reveal themselves most clearly when they think they have one. Eventually Daniel stood and began speaking. He described estate updates, administrative changes, asset management improvements. Every sentence sounded polished. Every explanation sounded reasonable. Anyone hearing him for the first time would have trusted him completely. That was what made him dangerous. After nearly 20 minutes, Daniel presented the final approval packet. According to him, signing the documents would simplify future management and protect family interests. He slid the paperwork toward Andrew. Vanessa smiled. My son reached for a pen. Before anyone signs anything, I said calmly, I would like to discuss a few documents of my own. The room fell silent. Daniel's smile weakened slightly. Vanessa looked at me but said nothing. I opened a folder and placed several printed pages on the table. The first contained records of financial transfers. The second showed ownership connections between consulting companies. The third displayed communication records linked to the restructuring process. One by one, I explained what Robert and I had discovered. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed the evidence. The atmosphere changed with every page. Andrew's expression slowly transformed from confusion to concern. Then I presented the messages recovered from the flash drive. Several relatives leaned forward to read them. Daniel attempted to speak. I raised a hand politely. You have had months to explain your version, I said. Now it is my turn. For the first time all afternoon, Daniel looked uncomfortable. Vanessa remained silent. Her confidence had begun to fade. I continued presenting timelines, payment records, and approval schedules. Every piece connected to the next. Every answer led back to the same people. Finally, Andrew looked directly at his wife. Is any of this true? He asked quietly. Vanessa opened her mouth but no words came out. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Sophie slowly stood from her chair. She looked at her mother. Then at her father. Then at me. Her hands trembled slightly as she held up her phone. There is something else everyone needs to see, she said. And the moment I saw what appeared on the screen, I realized the final secret was even bigger than the one we had already uncovered. The room remained silent as Sophie turned her phone toward the family. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even Daniel seemed uncertain for the first time all afternoon. Sophie swallowed hard before pressing the screen. A series of messages appeared. Not financial records. Not property documents. Personal conversations. Months of them. Conversations discussing plans, timelines, and private meetings. Conversations proving that Vanessa and Daniel had been working together far longer than anyone suspected. Several family members leaned forward. Andrew stared at the screen without blinking. The color slowly drained from his face. Sophie lowered the phone and looked directly at her mother. I did not want to believe it, she said quietly. I kept hoping there was another explanation. Vanessa opened her mouth as if searching for the right words. None came. For years she had always known exactly what to say. Now the room was filled with evidence instead of opportunities. Daniel finally stood. He attempted to explain the messages as professional discussions taken out of context. The argument lasted less than a minute. Robert calmly placed additional records on the table. The dates matched. The transfers matched. The planning matched. Every path led back to the same conclusion. Eventually Daniel stopped talking. There was simply nothing left to defend. Andrew remained seated for several moments, staring at the documents spread before him. Then he looked at Vanessa. The disappointment in his eyes hurt more than any angry words could have. "How long?" he asked quietly. Vanessa looked down at the table. The silence answered the question before she did. Around the room, relatives exchanged stunned glances. Nobody celebrated. Nobody enjoyed what was happening. The truth rarely feels victorious when it arrives. It simply arrives. As the afternoon continued, the meeting slowly came to an end. Daniel gathered his belongings and left first. Vanessa remained seated for several minutes after that. Her confidence was gone. The certainty that had carried her through months of planning had disappeared. Eventually she stood and walked toward the door. Sophie did not follow. Andrew did not follow. Nobody stopped her. After she left, the house felt strangely quiet. The tension that had filled every room for weeks finally began to lift. Later that evening, after the relatives had gone home, Andrew and I sat together in the kitchen. The same kitchen where he had eaten breakfast before school. The same kitchen where his father taught him how to make pancakes. For a long time neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me. "I should have listened to you." His voice was barely above a whisper. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "What matters is what you do now." He nodded slowly. A few weeks later, the legal matters were resolved. The property transfer was stopped. The family land remained protected. The altered documents were corrected. Every account was reviewed. Every questionable transaction was addressed. Life did not instantly return to normal. Trust takes longer to rebuild than paperwork. But healing had finally begun. One cold winter morning, I drove out to the family land alone. Snow covered the fields. The old fishing docks still stood beside the lake. I walked slowly across the property, remembering the years my husband and I spent building a future for our family. The wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. I thought I had witnessed a secret in a parking lot. What I really witnessed was the first crack in a much larger deception. In the end, the documents mattered. The money mattered. The property mattered. But none of those things were the true lesson. The real lesson was simpler. People can hide motives. They can hide plans. They can even hide the truth for a while. But character eventually reveals itself. And when it does, no amount of planning can hold a lie together forever.